So this is a good place to start. We've got alkaline storage batteries on the table here. It was, for us, your first major contribution, published contribution to ECS, one of many, many. And why don't you tell us a little bit about the book?
When I went back to graduate school after working at Sonotone and running the first sintering plant for nickel electrodes in the United States, Sonotone was primarily a hearing aid company. That's where the name came from. But I had a battery division. And it had two factories, one owned by the government for making stuff for Nike and the military, and a small factory of its own. And it was a failure. And it turned out to be because the powder for sintering nickel was made in the same plant as copper bearings, and there was copper contamination. And Sandia, who is our main customer, asked me what I thought would solve the problem. And I outlined a thesis for some student to do. And a month later, I got a request from Polytechnic, from which I had graduated, now part of NYU, to come back, and they described a project which is exactly what I told Sandia they should do. So I went back to finish a doctoral degree, and institutions were getting my reports. One of the institutions was a subsidiary of the Swedish company in Oskarshamn, for whom Uno Falk was the chief engineer. And Uno would visit me at Poly whenever he was in the United States. They had a factory in Long Island. And he was the most intelligent and discerning of all the people who came to ask questions. When I finally finished, I discovered that I had agreed to work for Electric Storage Battery rather than going back to Sonotone, and that they had a technology exchange agreement with Uno's company in Sweden. And I popped off on a vacation, and also had an offer for a Fulbright grant. And Uno and I decided to write the book then. And it took part-time, 7 or 8 years. And every year I would take my vacation and go live in Sweden with the Falks. We had 3 little children. And at the end we finished the book, but that was before there was computer editing of books. And so I was laboriously trying to edit a book, run a fairly big research group in Yardley, Pennsylvania. And the president of the company, Ed Dwyer, was very anxious that the book came out. And he said, look, I'm going to relieve you of running a lab of 20-odd people out of the 150 we had in Yardley. I'm going to give you a small group and a small assignment, and you'll have time to edit the book. And the small group was a couple of scientists and a few technicians. And I said, what's the theme of this new little group I'm going to run? He says, diversification. I want you to think of how we can diversify this company. And that led me into many other products and many other events. And the book got edited. And became fairly a substantial seller for a first book. By the way, I have now finished my 17th is one I'm doing for you, the new revision. So you get in the habit of writing.
I can attest to the scientific bestseller. It's been part of our monograph series since 1969 that we publish through John Wiley and Sons, and so I've followed the sales records of this book for many years, and again can attest to that it being a scientific bestseller. Let's back up a little bit.
Okay.
Let's start about your early life growing up. What was that like?
Grandparents on one side came from a town which is now Lithuania, which was in Russia in around 1860s. We're not sure of the time because before Ellis Island, there's no central records. In Ellis Island is 1898. But there were 9 kids born, and the Board of Health of New York City knows the birth date of all the kids very accurately. So that's on my father's side. My mother's side was Austrian, and we also have some Irish blood, so we're sort of mixed mongrels. I was brought up, my father was born in Manhattan, and he finally succeeded in buying a little house in Brooklyn, which had a special program for what they call gifted children. I don't know how gifted I was, but I wound up in it and made a lot of good friends. And then went to the local high school where you could walk to. And then eventually, at 17, to college. And then I enlisted in the Navy. And the dean talked me into hanging around long enough to get credit for the year. Came back, finished a degree, went to graduate school part-time, wound up working for a little dry cell company in Greenwich Village and then Sonotone, and then came back for a doctoral degree.
You're moving too fast for me, though. I want to come back to the gifted program or something that got you interested in science. Where did that occur?
Well, my
that?
father didn't have much formal education, but he was a reader. He read everything, and I had an uncle who was a professor of math, and just came naturally. Used to tinker with things as a kid.
And then you got into, when you went to NYU, which was formerly Polytech.
Poly is now part of NYU.
Right. Was it there that you had a little bit of a push into, maybe chemistry or physics that tickled the scientific interest?
I was lucky. I had very good teachers, and I appreciated them. And I guess the family always respected education, whether it was formal or informal. I guess my mother was one of the first women of her age to take any college courses at all. And so that there was that. What's interesting is that an older brother of my father's went to Australia when he was 21 in 1915. And now I have 4 generations of Australian-born cousins, all of which seem to be scientific or physicians, or I guess it's just a family interest.
Wonderful. Well, so then the first job was a dry cell company. So how did you focus in on electrochemistry? How did you get pushed in that direction?
Well, my master's thesis, supported by what was then Fort Monmouth, CCOM, which is now moved to Aberdeen, was on separators and membranes for batteries. And I was offered a job by a small dry cell company in Greenwich Village, which would let me continue going to grad school part-time. And then I moved from them to Sonotone, and then from there to electric storage battery. Always interested in research. I'm a curious person, and that's good. Then, when Electric Storage Battery Company of Yardley was taken over by International Nickel of Canada, and after a few years they decided to close the Yardley facilities when I switched to teaching full-time. And I wound up with 2 half-time jobs on the same Rutgers campus. One running a biomedical group in the Department of Surgery and tenured as a professor of surgery, and I'm not a physician at all. And the other being the associate dean of the School of Engineering. So fortunately, the 2 buildings are only 100 yards apart. I could take a lunch break and decide where I was going to eat.
Very interested in that part of your work with the surgical center. You want to tell us a little bit about what you were doing there? How do you, as a PhD scientist working in electrochemistry,
actually,
end up in surgery?
I'm not a PhD. I have a degree which, to many people's mind, I'm a doctor of chemical engineering, a very rare degree. It meant more coursework than a PhD, but fewer language requirements. And it suited my interest. And I don't even think most schools even offer the degree anymore. I got interested in battery-powered medical devices, this diversification procedure. And I had the opportunity to help somebody, a famous cardiac physician at Montefiore. Her name is Seymour Furman, and I helped him by designing things like trans-telephone monitoring system, which everybody uses now for monitoring patients with pacers and defibrillators, and got interested in heart pacing and defibrillation, the electrical an electrochemical society. How do you design a catheter to be efficient? And he was very appreciative, and we became best friends. And somehow somebody decided that I should join the College of Cardiology because I was giving papers. And to my surprise, they decided to make me a fellow rather than a member. And I met Jim McKenzie, who was starting up the surgery department of what was then Rutgers Vet School, at a meeting. And Jim convinced me that I should come and give lectures one afternoon a week. And the then president of the electric storage battery company, Fred Port, thought that would be a very good thing to do. And so out of that, when I was looking for a job, surgery was quick to offer me a position, but they only had half a line on the state budget. But to my surprise, I became a professor of surgery. That's the only title they knew. Tenured in the department.
And the fellow recognition was from who?
I'm a fellow of 5 societies. My favorite society was the last.
In 2014, that would be the Electrochemical Society.
Right.
And we're a little late. I think we should have done that 25 years ago. Right?
College of Cardiology, of AIMBE, of AAAS, of the New Jersey Academy of Medicine, and the Electrochemical Society. I'm running out of societies.
Tell us more about the evolution of batteries, your contributions, maybe your where you fit into all of this, and how that's affected.
Well, I'm surprised. There's a new book coming out next year in Europe on the 70 most significant battery inventions of all time, and starting back in historic times and going through Volta and all that. And I'm listed as one of the 70, and I said, what do you think was my important contribution? Because I had no idea why. And they said, you were the first person to ever build a battery into an X-ray port. And I said, yeah, but that was the only way of solving a solid-state reaction.
So for the laymen who might be watching this, tell us what that's about.
In trying to solve this problem for Sandia of why the batteries were failing, it was a nickel-cad battery, and nobody understood what the charge states were of the nickel electrode. So I decided to build a battery into an X-ray port and be able to track the change in chemistry, crystallography actually, as you go through the charge process. Interesting to me, the physics department at Poly was willing to do this and permanently give me a port, provided I buy an X-ray tube for their benefit.
I'm curious how you feel about your career and the balance between academia and industry that you experienced. It's unique, particularly with the segment of it that involves the biomedical applications with the surgical center. What do you make of all of that?
The most important aspects of my work have been in battery-powered medical devices and certain aspects of energy storage. I think the world is going electrochemical, or certainly electrical, and becoming more efficient. I worry a little bit about pollution and what we're doing, but we can solve that electrochemically also. One of my favorite platers in New Brunswick has no sewer connection at all. Keeps recycling the water and the metals. And that's very good for the future.